Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Riley, and I'm an 8th grade math teacher, and I'm going to be presenting 4 professional development sessions on mathematics, curriculum design, and assessment. And 2 of them will kind of be paired together, but there will be 4 different videos for you to tune in. And I'm glad that you're with me. I'm glad that you want to dive into alternative methods for curriculum design and for assessment. For me, there's been so much since I started teaching. There's a lot of pushback against tradition, and some tradition needs to go. But I'd always been skeptical as to whether the alternatives are just as effective as what education has been for a long time. So you can see my title is quite, for this first session, is quite provocative. The problem of percentages. Right off the bat, I'm saying it's a problem. And I do believe it is, but all of this came from careful thought and careful perusing of the details for these traditional practices and whether they were actually problematic and whether the alternatives are truly better. And I really want you to join this ride with me in a way where we can see that there is not just like an idealized vision for education, which we so often sometimes see in research or scholarship is sometimes idealized. It's not practical enough. But I would really like us to see that, like, the traditional percentage practices, they have hiccups and they're not as objective as we'd like them to be. And I'm going to show you some stories that I think will communicate something along those lines, but that there is other ways to do assessment and curriculum design that are just as effective, that they work in the classroom, they work for all of your students. It's not something that we can't try, and it's not something that someone just made up in a lab that hasn't been in a classroom. I try this, I believe it, I am in for it. So I just want you to join me with that. I also have just a bit of information regarding the sessions. So like I said, there will be 4 videos. 2 of them will be part 1 and part 2 of their own session. And you'll also see that however you've gotten the link to seeing these sessions, there will be a link to a folder, and that will have a large amount of documents. So it will include my notes, all of my scripts. So if you would prefer a transcript version of this to read, you have that. That's available to you. You can open that for all of the sessions. You'll also find handouts, and the handouts are for interacting with this session. So not only does it maybe have some point form notes or some things to take home, but it also has questions for discussion, for reflection, and for enrichment. And the last thing that you'll find in that folder are appendices. And my appendices are hands-on examples, either examples that I have already made that you could use for inspiration, or hands-on templates that are empty, that are ready to be filled. So I hope that this is an enlightening session. I'm motivated to make it the best that it can be. I'm looking forward to discussing and sharing what it is that I've learned, and hopefully letting you know that I was a skeptic of a lot of this once also. So I hope that we're in this together and that you can come and learn with me. So I'm looking forward. Thank you for joining me. Thank you. Before we get into the learning and all that, we have lots of time for that. There's going to be plenty to go through, plenty of content to discuss. I just wanted to let you know a bit more about myself, what I believe education should be, my philosophy for teaching. And I'd like to let you know that my philosophy or my beliefs, for staff and students, they mirror each other, or for teachers and students. So the first thing is that I really believe that teaching and learning are vocational callings. So they require a deep commitment to what it is that we do. So teachers are deeply committed to teaching, and students are deeply committed to learning. That's how it should be. That's my vision for what goes on inside of a classroom. I'm sure you've seen or heard of teachers that are just checked out, or you've seen students in your class that just can't connect with what you're doing. My vision for education is a deep commitment to what we're doing. I also believe that takes risks. I talk to my students all the time. I teach 13-year-olds about social risks, academic risks. All of these risks are worth it, especially when I think about risks that contribute to your joy, and social risks for a 13-year-old, and teaching risks like this session might be a risk for you to challenge traditional assessment practices. Or even behind me. I wasn't going to use my background so often, but I guess I'll point to it twice this session. I have a quotation that says, "You don't hate math, you hate being frustrated." To believe that takes a risk, because it's easier to just say you hate math, right? So I do believe in risk taking, and I my students from last year will probably tell you that they heard that all the time. So I deeply believe it, and I believe it for myself too. I need to find ways to take risks as a educator as well. And then another thing my students heard all the time last year is work hard, play hard. I believe learning should be fun. And I remember when I was in my professional year and we were writing teacher credos, everyone said learning should be fun. And I so often will push back on idealized idea or idealized ideas, and that learning should just be fun and it's going to be great. And it's like, well, you know what? Learning should be fun, but it's going to be darn difficult. And you're going to have to work hard. It's going to take a load of responsibility and a lot of thought. So not only can you play hard and enjoy, but you're going to have to work hard. And then after working hard, we're going to party. We're going to celebrate. We're going to do what it is that we need to do. And that's for students that are learning, but I think that's for teachers when they finish their report cards, or teachers when they have accomplished something new, or won a volleyball season or something like that. I believe in work hard, play hard. And then I also believe that it's very difficult to learn if you don't belong. So a commitment to authentic community is important, that teachers need to commit themselves to making the room a place where the students are meant to be. That so often I hear teachers greeting the students at the door. That's important. I hear about teachers doing morning meetings or circling up and making sure every student is heard. That's important. Uh, I use random groupings all the time. If you've read any Peter Lilly at all, he believes in random groupings. And random groupings are a great way for kids to get to know each other, because if they're with someone that they don't know, there's a low, well, the floor is low for risk. It's still a risk, but the floor is low because they don't need to be with them forever, but they still get to know them this much. And then the next time they might be in a random group, they get to know them this much. And that is not just a falsified community. That's actually people getting to know each other. So that's what I believe about education, and I hope that comes through in these sessions. But just on the side, I also love to coach volleyball. I played volleyball for a long time. I love to travel. And then hiking. I live in British Columbia, so maybe you can expect that. I love going outdoors with my students too. Frequently I've hiked overnight with them on trips, which is great. And then I also love to read. I've read 6 books this summer. And then I love, right here, another one behind me, the second time I'm pointing, is Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. That's their logo. They won the first game of the season. They're in first place in the league. I'm having a really good summer so far. So I love to watch soccer, play volleyball, watch soccer. But that's just a little bit more about me. So let's keep going with this. There are some people I need to thank. I know we're going to get to the learning, but there's some people I need to thank. So much of this is I'm using these sessions to fulfill my capstone project for my master's in professional education, and so much of professional education comes from practice and research together. And I've learned so much over the past 2 years, but I'd like to thank some key colleagues as well. I wouldn't be able to do this without what I've learned from them. And they often say the best professional development is next door. So I'd like to thank some of the people that were next door. So thank you, Nina, for teaching me and my colleagues about Katie White. Thank you, Megan, for listening to Nina. And thank you, Kathy, for telling people to pay attention to Megan. And thank you, Rick, for making space for all these ideas at our school. And I'd like to thank also all of my MPED colleagues that I've gotten to know online, and I thank them for their tireless feedback. So I've learned so much from all of you, and I'm very thankful for all of you. So thank you. Let's move on. This session and future sessions will consist of a number of vignettes or short stories or snapshot situations. And I'd like to use them to force us to think a little bit. I want us to start to percolate about assessment and about percentages and about curriculum design and what these stories may be communicating about what it is that we're actually doing in the classroom. You heard my deep beliefs, and I hope that your deep beliefs will react a little bit to some of these stories. So here's our first vignette. And this is a student who comes home with a 75% on their report card. You could also imagine that this is a math test, perhaps. And you'll hear me talk, I'll put a disclaimer later also, but you'll hear me talk about tests a lot. A lot of you may be over tests, that's too traditional. I'm challenging the idea of percentages, and percentages deeply are dealing with testing and quizzing. So I'm going to be using tests as an example a lot. It's just the nature of how it is. But take a look at this. It says Math 8, Mr. Dueck, 75%. B, that's their letter grade. Your child is pleasant in class. What questions would you have for this student if you were their parent or even their teacher? And then how do you think the student would respond to your questions? Like if you had questions about what the 75% meant or how they're doing. And from your judgment, would you say that they've demonstrated success? And could you justify your thinking by just taking a look at this snapshot? And then as a teacher, would you feel comfortable reporting this? Like if this was the thing you sent home, is this what you say, yes, perfect. This is what my student needed to learn. This is how they're doing. Here you go, student and parent. This is it. How comfortable would you feel? Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10. I'd like to add a little bit more information. So let's pretend that maybe you're a parent here and this is the report card that's come home. Parents talk, parents have friends, students have friends, and it turns out that Mr. Dueck, this teacher, happens to also be my name, gave another report card to a friend of this child, and they scored 76%, not 75, so 1% more than your child. By getting that report card or that news and looking at this one, do you think you could distinguish what makes the friend 1% better than your child? And do you think that with confidence that the teacher could explain what the difference of the 1% is? Then I would also ask, if this is 75%, is your child 3/4 successful on all assignments, or might it represent like 75% complete understanding and 25% complete lapse? So what does the 75% refer to? Is it strength or deficit? Is it both? And then my last question is, would you prefer some more information? I honestly, when I look at this, the only piece of information I can confidently say that the student has is that they're pleasant in class. The 75%, you could use that or whatever it is that you need to do, but I would have questions as to what it means, and I've tried to articulate that. And hopefully you're starting to feel a little bit of your beliefs push back against some of this or what it is that you're seeing in front of you. Let's move on to a second vignette. Here we have a similar structure. Student in grade 8 in Mr. Dueck's class receives 68.5%. 0.5%, not even a whole number, and they get a C+. And then the comment says your child must complete their homework. This is the report card that goes home. So some of you might be pushing back against homework. I know that that's something that is a tradition that people are saying no to more and more. But this teacher, Mr. Dueck, how dare he? He's assessing homework, and this child needs to do more of it. And 68.5% or a C+, traditionally, I think your gut reaction would be like, okay, like we're lacking success. And in the last vignette, I asked, would you like some more information? So for this vignette, I do have some more information that I'd like to share with you, and that is the teacher's grade book. So let's take a look at that. I'll just give you a bit of time to take a look at this. This is what I would consider this is fiction, but this is just perhaps a traditional assessment weighting. 60% on tests, 20% on quizzes, 14% on homework, 5% on attendance. I don't necessarily, like I know I said Mr. Dueck, I don't use this, but this is just a sample of our student. And I'd like you to take a look. The overall represents how well they did on each, and then the percent of the final mark is the weighting, because not each thing is weighted equally. And then you get your final grade of a C+, 68.5. What do you notice here? The first thing you might take a look at is homework, because the comment mentioned that the student needs to do more homework, and you'll notice that they only completed their homework 7% of the time. That's not very often. 7 out of 100 is pretty low, and you can see that only earned them 1% of their final grade. Not doing so hot in that regard. But if you look left, well, right, attendance, they were in class. Great that they get marks for that. But if you look left, uh, they're scoring 82% on their tests and 70% on their quizzes. That is higher than the overall grade by quite a bit, quite a long shot. They're doing exceptional on tests, actually, in comparison to their final grade. And yet, this student is being held back. You can see their final grade is much lower than they're performing on the tests. So does the 68% actually reflect their learning? Like, did they need to do their homework? It seems like I'm shrugging my shoulders, hands up, but it seems like maybe they didn't. They did fine without it. So then the next question is this objective? Percents, we've had this traditional idea that percentages are objective, but objectively speaking, it looks like they excelled in the tests, and yet their grade reflects a C+. So then what is most important when communicating where a student's at in their learning? Are homework and attendance a major reflection of accomplishing their learning goals? Just some questions to percolate as you take a look at this teacher's gradebook. Let's move on to a third vignette. This is something I know well as a grade 8 math teacher, is a fraction operations test. Can you multiply fractions? Can you divide fractions? Student scores 15 out of 24. That's a 63%, if you were wondering. 63%, which is usually, traditionally a C minus, not a very high letter grade. And let's remember for a moment that 15 out of 24, this is something that the teacher, if we're using traditional percentage methods, this is something that the teacher is going to type in their gradebook, hit enter, and it's going to get smushed into that 60% test section that's going to later produce a final grade. So that's a typical practice for percentages. So when we look at this, we might think like this student is struggling. They're not necessarily thriving in what it is that they need to do when it comes to fraction operations. But I actually have, once again, more information. If you noticed, whenever we have a percentage, we need to dig deeper. We need more information. So this test was divided into 4 sections, and each section was worth 6 points. So I have that data for you here in this vignette. And take a look at that. I've highlighted the lowest score just so we can see where there was some lapse in understanding. But what I'd like you to notice is that 15 of those points in the point total, they're from high scores in 3 of the 4 sections: multiplying, adding and subtracting, and problem solving. Dividing fractions is a 0 out of 6, not a single successful answer or a single successful solution. And you might start to wonder, well, why was that? And I can tell you a little bit just in terms of this story. So this student honestly forgot to flip and multiply when dividing. They just multiplied their fractions again. They forgot to use the reciprocal function. And this is something I've seen. I'm using this example because I've seen this in my grade 8 math class. And the student lost 6 points because of simple forgetfulness. And 4 points, or 3 points, I guess, out of the other 3 sections were lost because of error or misunderstanding. So does the student deserve a 9-point deduction and a C minus? Especially when you take a look at that 5 out of 6 on solving problems. That is an application skill. They're able to apply and transform their thinking. So does that low 63% reflect a high-level thinker? So I hope you're wrestling with that a little bit. So much so we should pause for discussion. So here are 2 discussion questions, and we'll take a small break here. You can pause the video if you'd like so, and if you're with some people, you can talk about that, or you can just ponder these questions. But after listening to the 3 vignettes, is there a common theme or thread that you can identify? After hearing these 3 vignettes, what is missing to effectively communicate how a student has learned? Consider the role of summative assessments, formative assessments, and final reports. All those things help communicate how a student has learned. So just some things for you to think about, and then we will resume and continue to talk about percentages. You'll know that I'm biased here. I'm discussing the problem of percentages, and I'd like to identify four of them, the first being the clarity of percentages. But to begin, just a refresh for those who have been out of the percentage world for a while. So, a typical strategy for assessing mathematics learning has been to total points on quizzes, tests, projects in hopes of calculating a percentage. That percentage would reflect a student's performance on any given task or in the performance of a course. Once the tasks or semester are completed, they would be weighted and then put together for a final grade that could then be categorized as a letter grade. And what you'll notice is that usually percentages mark every mark earned or lost in a class would be calculated towards that final grade. And the final grade out of 100 was an amalgamation of all the students' mathematics performances through the course. You can see this process in reverse if you look at the vignettes. So, for example, vignette number 3 is a math test. Student scores 15 out of 24. That gets put in the grade book for vignette number 2 in that 60% weighted test. That's where it would go. All plays into that. And then all of those get smushed together. That's a good mathematical term, smushed, or averaged, or weighted. And that would go onto a report card where a student would get 75% B, and your child is lovely in class. And that's typically the how do you say, the process or the method for using percentages. So I would like to reflect on this a little bit, and I would like to say that Justin Bieber said it best in 2015 when he said, "What do you mean?" And I would like to ask the exact same question for percentages. What do you mean? See, for years, percentages have appeared to be objective, precise assessment tools. However, a 75% grade with a short comment, as we saw in the first vignette, does little to help stakeholders understand what a student has learned. See, one inhibitor of clarity is a lack of definition for letter grades, as they're usually defined by point totals, going back to percentages. And then in turn, one would ask how the point totals are defined. And with 100 levels of proficiency, it's difficult to define each one. And you could even add that if you need a 50% to pass, 50% of those levels are failure or defined by failure. Or if you need 60% to pass a course, let's say, I'm just using it as an example, over half of your gradations are defined by failure. That's crazy. I don't know. My beliefs push back against that. That seems excessive. So then, what does 75% mean? What's the clarity there? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it pleasant? Is it? I'm left unsure. And see, when we rewind, is 68% a fair assessment of a student's learning when they ace their exams? And is 63% a true reflection of what a student has learned when they only misinterpreted one subtopic? So I would have I'll have some rhetorical questions for percentages. So here are some of the questions. How could we be more clear? How could we define assessments that are currently labeled as 75%? And how could we explain clearly that students are actually gifted in mathematics when their report card says drastically otherwise? See, the issue here revolves around clarity, and clarity is one of the most important tools a teacher has when designing curriculum and assessing student learning. I'd like to let us know that John Hattie, a researcher, and his co-researcher, Klaus Zierer, they did numerous meta-analyses on different teaching practices, and teacher clarity is one of the highest scoring teaching practices. It scores 0.75 on their meta-analyses scale. So clarity is incredibly important, and it's something that percentages are just lacking. So as we ask questions regarding clarity and assessment, we can feel comforted that our work is not in vain. Clarity is a remarkable tool when teaching, and we will continue to explore what this means for practitioners throughout these sessions. Let's move on to the second practice, or the second problem of percentages. Objectivity versus subjectivity. Percentages seem more objective. I keep showing my cards. I say the word seem, and you'll notice that teachers want to be objective when they're doing assessment, and that's admirable. I think that's good. You want to know where a student is at, not just guess, right? And a number seems, or a percentage seems like a concrete way to do that. They're sadly not as objective as we would like them to be. So, do we remember the second vignette and the student that worked well on all the tests and the quizzes but didn't do their homework? Objectively speaking, when I look at that grade book, it seems that they're a very successful student. The tests and quizzes, I would say, speak for themselves if we're using tests and quizzes. Wouldn't we say that it's actually rather subjective to hold a student back then? To say that, well, your homework is so important that your performance has to be measured in a certain way. What's clear is that the decision to make those weightings was completely subjective. The teacher made that. That was not an objective decision. It's completely based off of the teacher's judgment to include homework in the final grade. So I'm not saying that simply using just test percentages would solve all of our problems, but I wonder if like choosing to focus on performance would be a better way to assess learning. And I know I'm being incredibly subjective in choosing that. And I'm actually thinking, showing my cards again, we need to embrace a bit more subjectivity. I would call it functional subjective judgment. I'll say that. Or some people call it professional judgment. But because I'd like to use the term subjective so that we don't just think we've found a new objective realm for us to dabble in. So I have a quotation that I'd like us to read from a scholar. This is from Romagnano in 2001. This is a long time ago. Well, now it seems like a long time ago. Objectivity, like the mythical pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, would be wonderful if we could have it, but it does not exist. All assessments of students' mathematical understanding are subjective. And just another note from another scholar named Gusky, who says that objectivity assumes the infallibility of our testing device. So you could also ask, like, we're being objective. He says, well, no. What if you ask a question that's too hard by accident? What if it's out of line of the curricular goals, even just by this much? All of a sudden, your percentage is not as objective as you thought. And that happens more than you might think. Let's remember that third vignette where the student completed the test having completely forgot how to divide fractions, but was able to demonstrate a strong understanding of problem solvings, which we'll say is a deeper level of thinking. And that's backed in research. Bloom's taxonomy would say that applying something is a deeper level than comprehending it. So on the test, a point for a simple fraction comprehension question or fraction operation comprehension question, it is level with an application. That's also a subjective decision to say that those are equal. That is not just some objective total. Well, this is how much you got. Sorry about that. And we can be confident in that, knowing that Bloom's taxonomy tells us that application is a higher level of thinking. So wouldn't it be better to highlight that? Wouldn't it be better to say that the student has achieved a higher level of thinking and just forgot to divide? You don't need a number to say that. And we can be subjective enough to say that, because percentages were being subjective before I decided to make that comment, right? Percentages decided, well, I don't want to say percentages, but a teacher who was using percentages decided that problem solving would be equal to comprehension. So I would just like go back on that. Why can't I? It's not like the rules are so strict. The rules, it's already more subjective than we think. Here's another quotation from another scholar named Peter Liljedahl, scholar and mathematics genius, mathematics education genius. You should definitely read more of his